Hi everyone and welcome to another PlayUK webinar organized by British Council. My name is Tamara and I will be your host today. As many of you know, PlayUK is a festival focused on innovation in games and interaction between arts and technology. It is now also a digital event, so everyone online can visit and enjoy its content. We have prepared many formats for you guys and for everyone that is interested in the game industry, so you can explore these topics and learn more from our PlayUK experts. But for a while now, once a month, we've been having these live sessions where our UK developers can interact with the audience directly and can share their knowledge. This time, I am joined by Jon McKellan, who will talk about design and concepts behind his award-winning game, Observation. So thank you for joining us, Jon. Just before we get started, a few service informations. Webinar in general. The session will run for 90 minutes and it will be fully interactive and open to all of you. We will try to answer all of your questions after each block of Jon's lecture. So we strongly encourage you to write all of your questions in the QA box and I will make sure to go through all of them. Also, the recording of this lecture will be available on YouTube in a few days and also on British Council's own website. So as I mentioned earlier, our today's guest is Jon, who is the creative director at No Code Studio. Hi, Jon. Thank you for being with us today once again. And could we start maybe with you telling us a little bit about yourself and what you will be showing us today?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Jon McKellan. I'm the creative director and co-founder of our studio No Code. And we've been around for about 5 years now, and kind of carved a niche for ourselves for making narrative-driven, atmospheric games for PC and console. And I previously worked in kind of AAA games. I worked at Creative Assembly. I worked at Rockstar. On a lot of big games for 10, 12 years maybe, and then decided that it was time to kind of found my own studio and make my own games. So that kind of brings me to now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That is a pretty impressive resume, and I'm sure we all will have so much to hear from you today, especially since you'll be talking about really experimental and unusual type of game that is Observation, right? So it is something that we don't see every day, and for those of you who don't know, Jon, of course, will know, will have something more to tell you about this, but this is a game where you take a hold of a computer on a satellite, right?
Yeah. So yeah, we basically, in Observation, you take on the role of a space station's artificial intelligence rather than as one of the astronauts on the station. So yeah, it's fairly experimental in the perspective that we view things from, and how our gameplay and story work together. But we kind of package it up in a fairly, accessible mainstream kind of way, so that it's not, it doesn't feel like a simulation or anything like that. It feels like an adventure and a story. Yeah, so it is quite unique in that way.
Right. The interesting thing that I noticed about Observation is that it actually is more immersive since you take the control of a computer than when you take control of a character. Since, I don't know, at least for me, when I played it, I felt like I have more direct control over the game than when I play a character that I see in 3D. So I think that was really interesting, an interesting approach.
Yeah, it's kind of strange because we're asking the player to, essentially role play as something that they can't imagine. Right. That we can kind of imagine being an astronaut on a space station or something like that, but we can't imagine what it would be like to be a computer. And I think that actually helps because what we show in the game, you take that 100% rather than comparing it to something you've already done or anything like that. So it really is kind of a blank slate for the player. So yeah, I think it actually removes a lot of barriers, even though we're playing as something that's not human.
Right. And another interesting thing about the game is actually that you are both its game director and also the lead UI artist, so to say, because UI is such a big part of this game, right?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, it was kind of, when we started pitching the project, there was only myself and Omar, who was the co-founder. And we wanted to build a game and a story that played to our strengths, so that we could, we could deliver something that was really good with a small budget, with a small team. And my background has been in user interface design and visual effects, and Omar's background was in audio and music. And so we thought, well, let's do something that makes the most out of UI design and makes the most out of atmospheric sound, and that's where one of the things that kind of started the whole thing off.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and a really interesting angle from which to view game development. Rarely do interface and music come into such front scene as in observation.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we use UI in every single game that we play, and some games that the games that often do rely on user interface are usually more strategic or simulation based, stuff like that, but rarely is it based on story. And I think that's the kind of thing that makes this a kind of a one-off, like a very unique game, is that it needs the story to be what it is in order to do that. Like, to play as a computer, to use UI as a main extension of that is something that you can only really do in this kind of story. You can just do that anywhere. So all those pieces kind of fell together, and we ended up with an idea that genuinely hadn't been done before.
Yeah. So for your lecture today, you will be actually taking us from scene to scene, right, in observation, especially because it's so important UI-wise how the player really fills this role of a computer who is, in control of a space station and who wants to help a crew and find out what happens. So I think it's a really interesting lecture format as well, where you can tell us a lot about your design process and how this game came to be by examining a scene by scene in observation.
Yeah, so the plan today is to focus on three sections in the first kind of act of the game, and look at each of those with a different lens. In the first case, we'll look at the story element and how that scene came to be, why it's important, and how we built it. The second one will look more about the gameplay side of things and how we integrate UI, gameplay, and narrative together to kind of solve an objective for the story. And the third one will kind of look at the credit sequence that we produced and why that was important, even though it seems like it's kind of polish and it seems like it's something unnecessary, why it was necessary, and how we built that as well.
Right. Sounds interesting. I know I'm super excited to hear it, so maybe we can jump into it.
Sure thing. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen just now and just play this opening scene. For those who have not played the game, you can see what the kind of opening 3 or 4 minutes of the game actually is, and then I'll kind of break that down and talk about that. So I'll play the video just now. Just give me 2 seconds. I think we're not getting sound from the screen. I'll just fix that. Okay, try that again.
Oh, it's working now.
Yeah. You've had some sort of accident, collision or something, Reporting. Sam? Sam. Houston, I have no response from Sam. I'm going to attempt.
Ah, shit. Sam? Sam, are you there? Come on, come on, come on. Come on. Okay, Sam. I need you to give me admin access. Enable voice authentication. Dr. Emma Fisher, 130-412. Great, thanks, Sam. That's good.
Okay, so that's the opening section of the game, and that section has been written and rewritten since before we even took the pitch to Sony and Devolver back in 2016 maybe. And it was a very, very important scene. Obviously the start of any film or any movie or any game is very important, but this was actually the beginning of our prototype as well. So this was like the sales pitch for our publishers to kind of explain what this game was. And we've always described the game as being like 2001: A Space Odyssey, only you play as HAL. That's been our kind of go-to line, because most people have seen 2001, most people are aware of the concept of it and who HAL is, and they can kind of put themselves in that position and go, all right, so you play as the robot, you know, essentially, you play as the android. But what that actually means is much harder to convey. It's quite difficult to explain what it would feel like to be a robot, what your interactions would be. When we told people it was a UI-driven adventure that also referenced things like Interstellar and Gravity and things like that, it was quite hard for people to put that together when we were pitching it before we could really show them anything. So, so this scene has been, you know, like I say, iterated on, but you know, it's been very structurally similar from the very beginning of development. And so I'm going to just run through why it was important, how we actually pieced that together. So I've got I've been digging through the archives and found the original script. So this is the original script for this section, and as you can see, it's written very much like a film script or a TV script, very traditional formatting, and that works well for sequenced events like this, where there's no player interactivity, there's no choice. It's just, you know, it's a cutscene essentially, and this is what this is how things began, you know, written as a story. So I was able to get the idea across to my business partner and get the idea across to one of the artists that was helping us make the environments just by writing the script and letting people read this. And if anyone's a fan of the game, you'll notice that Emma is referred to as Ellie the whole way through. That was her original name, which was conceived before The Last of Us. And then The Last of Us came out in 2014, I think it was, and we thought, right, we're going to have to change that now. But she was Ellie for a long time, and we basically like worked through this scene, and my idea was that I needed to convey several things in that opening. I had to convey who you were, where you were, the situation you were in, and the people you were in that situation with. That was like the four objectives of that scene. Is that, and the point is that by 2 minutes into the game, you know everything you need to know to get started. That you're not kind of going, you know. You're not kind of wondering who you are, where you are, that we're hitting you with that right away. And it means that as a player, you're not worried about the unknown, you're just moving ahead with the task at hand, and you're being asked to do something, so you're going to go do it. All of the things that we do tell you are mysteries. Like we're planting seeds for mysteries, like, you know, where are the crew, where is the station, all these questions we kind of get them across right away, so that you know what the objective is, you know what the kind of higher story is. In literally a matter of 3 or 4 lines into the game, you've got an understanding of what's happening. So it's been really finely tuned over the years. And the first line of dialogue in there is Houston, do you copy? Houston, come in. this is Dr. Emma Fisher on board observation, please respond. And so the first line is telling you who this character is, because she's the one you're going to be with the entire time. She's your objective, she's the one you're going to protect for the length of the game. So she literally introduces herself. But it's done in what we call a diegetic way, a way that diegetic usually means that the sound or the voice or the line that you're using exists in the fictional world as well as in your world. So we're telling you a character name, but we're telling you in a way that makes sense to the story as well. So she's talking to Houston, which most people kind of, connect with, NASA or Apollo or, a base on the ground. She tells you who she is, what she does. She's a doctor, and she's on board observation. Right away, you've got kind of everything you need to know. And the thing about film scripts is that these kind of sections in between, these big, descriptive sections about action, they're really great when you're writing a script and when you're storyboarding. But the player doesn't see any of that. They don't get to read that, and they don't get to get the same information. So when we say a loud electrical pop and suddenly a view fills the screen, it's the interior of a space station. I can state that in the script, but in the game world, I can't just tell you it's a space station. I have to hint at that. I just show you the interior of something kind of weird, and you've got to work that out. And so you have to go to extra lengths to teach the player what this environment is. So, for example, at that line where it says, that a vision fills the screen, is this section here, where sunlight pours through, and you can kind of, I'll just move this for a second. You can see that sunlight is passing through. That hints that possibly the room you're in is spinning or the ship is spinning, but there's a few key things placed in that scene to tell you that you're on a space station and not on a underground base somewhere. That you're not underground, you're not in a factory. Like, we've got to make it very clear. So we have a couple of props that are floating around in 0G. So right away you're thinking there's gravity issues, and we put a space helmet in there just to kind of nail that home, is that this is somewhere outside of Earth's atmosphere. On top of that, helmets on their own without a suit or without a person can sometimes feel a bit creepy, as if someone maybe needs that helmet and doesn't have it. And it sets a little bit of a horror tone, even just having that one thing. It's essentially a head floating in space, so it immediately gets you a little bit nervous. But that little line of text in the script, as you can see here, sunlight pours in intermittently in the rhythm of accelerated sunrise and sunsets. That's that 3 seconds of gameplay that just really kind of lets you know this top line that you're on a space station. And as I said earlier, the next thing we wanted to do was say, okay, well, what's the situation you're in? So she immediately says that she's had some sort of accident, collision. The station is spinning, but I can't tell if we're falling towards Earth. I can't get a visual. Now, again, that's a really important paragraph. We're saying that there's been an accident of some sort, that we don't know what it is. So there's a mystery. We're planting the seed of a mystery. That the station is spinning justifies the spinning of the light and says the word station for the first time. And then the last line here is really, really important for what we deliver later on in the first act, which says, I can't tell if we're falling towards Earth. So that one line gives you that indication that this is a space station that orbits Earth. You're not in, far some distant galaxy. You're not in deep space. You're above Earth, and you're worried that the space station is going to collide or go back into the atmosphere. So it sets up the expectation that that's where you are. And what we do at the end of the first act, and apologies for spoilers if no one's played it, but at the end of the first kind of 20 minutes, we reveal that the station isn't above Earth. It's in the orbit of Saturn. And so we're just setting up this kind of like, we're setting the rules to say, okay, we don't know if the station's been damaged, but it could be something normal. It's obviously dangerous, but it could be it's impacted by debris or something. But you're above Earth, you're talking to Houston. All the signs say this is a Earth orbiting space station. So when we reveal that you're not above Earth, it has a lot more impact. And then from then on, we talk about Josh, Ailsa, anyone report in. This is just to immediately let you know there are more characters involved. This is not a station that has one person on it, that there are other crew members. So these little lines, they sound believable. They sound just like something that someone would say over the kind of intercom to Houston, but they are telling you, the player, a lot of really important aspects of this opening. And then the last piece of the puzzle is telling the player who they are, because all you're seeing is this kind of, you don't even know it's a camera view at this point. It's just that you're just being shown an image of a space station and some floating objects. You don't actually know that you're viewing it through a camera. You could be, at this point, you could be a person sitting at the end of that hallway. There's nothing to say, there's no HUD, there's no visual effects, there's nothing to say that you're not just a person sitting in that room spinning and that suddenly you're going to get up and float around. And that's where we start talking about, we introduce the name Sam, and that she says she has no response for Sam. And then she says, I'm going to attempt to, and there's a spark, and that's when the UI kicks in. And that's the reveal that, oh, you're not a person, you're a computer, or you're an android, or you're something non-human. So in the video clip, she says, I'm going to attempt to, and then we get a flash of light, and a red light comes on, like that. And the first thing we start to see is this kind of boot up sequence. We see stuff that we're familiar with. We see loading, we see, DOS style file paths and different things, and then there's a lot of detail in these, like they're not just random bits of text. Everything that it goes through is, all these words are relevant to the system. They're all, we're a little bit geeky that way. We put a lot of stuff in. We tease names of crew members and stuff like that, but it's really selling this idea that you are the one that's booting up, not a system that you might use. The last part of that sequence where she says, come on, and things are loading, is that she says, okay, Sam, I need you to give me access, start voice authentication. And this is really, we took the idea for voice authentication from, a million films that have done this kind of thing, voice print IDs. But the most interesting thing was that it's kind of like how we talk to Alexa. It's like how we talk to Google Home. We ask the computer questions, and it will do things for us. And that's really the setup for the entire game, is that the crew are going to ask you to do things much like you would ask, a home computer to do that for you, except you're the one that has to work out how to do it, and that's what's different. You need to be the one. If you said to Alexa, okay, can you play a song by some artist? You're the one that's going to have to go and find that song and play that song in those steps. You have to work out the logic of doing that, and that's the premise of the game. So the first task we give you is exactly that. We say we need you to start voice authentication. The words voice authentication flash up on the screen in a kind of unmissable way. It's really bold. We're saying, yep, this is voice authentication. And then you're given a waveform to analyze. So she says her name. We click analyze, we process that, and the player has to push the left stick to be the one that actually does the work. And we use this theme throughout all the gameplay, is that when she asks you to do something, we don't let the computer do it for you, we make you do it because it's your job.
Right.
And when you get to that thing, to the end of that, it says that there are, let me just go back, that there are voice print errors detected. And there's kind of crackle and a breakup in her signal while she read out her name and her ID, and so it says there's errors detected. And this is the first choice we give the player, and it's again a really calculated choice, is that we give you this really binary decision to accept or reject. Now, the reason why this is important is because it tells the player, not overtly but subconsciously, the role that they play. The story is about Sam, the AI, becoming self-aware and then trying to discover why that's happened and what that really means. Now, Sam becomes self-aware the minute the player takes over. So the player is taking over control, and the player is providing that humanity. They're providing the curiosity, the instinct, the trust or lack of. So in this instance, the first thing we're asking you to do is say, there are some errors in this audio, but it sounds like, as a human, we're thinking, well, she sounds like she's in danger, and she sounds like, why would she lie, and all these kind of things. But there is an error, right? So there is a problem. But as a computer, If you were a non-conscious computer, you would just say, there's an error, decline. But we're giving you the choice now because as a human or as a conscious AI, you've now got the ability to decide whether you trust someone. So you're given this free will right away to make a decision based on your gut instinct. And that's the crux of the game. That's when we let the player realize that I've got the ability to do something different here that a computer couldn't do. So the choices you can make here, you can accept or reject. If you accept, she says, thank you very much, and you move on to the next scene. If you say reject, then she says, okay, well, let me try again. And she says her ID again, only this time it is successful. That the line is a bit clearer and you don't have any errors. And so again, you can accept or reject. If you reject a third time, she uses an override to bypass this. And it's kind of noted for later on in the story that happened, that she had to bypass this from you. And the voice authentication is something we do regularly throughout the game. So I think it's 4 or 5 times you do the voice authentication. And it's the same concept every time, the same gameplay every time, but by getting into the habit of doing it, we set up a relationship between you and Emma, and then we, without spoiling too much, we then try and break down that relationship a little bit and break down that trust, so that the 4th time you do it, you're not really sure whether you should say accept or not. And again, that's your gut feeling, not your computer feeling, but your gut. So that's kind of that opening scene was, like I say, was worked and reworked many times. Like I say, it started off as a script page. Where we take that from then, just to give you an idea about how we actually produce these kind of scenes, what I do, and I think quite a few other studios will do a similar thing, is that we take these scripts and then we convert that into something that a game can actually use. A game can't parse this kind of information. We need to put it into a system where we can actually extract that data and make it appear on the screen as subtitles, stuff like that. So what I do then is create a story Bible of this stuff. And a story Bible for us was kind of almost like a shooting script that you get in film. It's a differently formatted dialogue script that has every line of dialogue in and not really have much of the other information. It doesn't have a lot of the descriptions of, like, something goes bang and Ellie jumps out the room and things like. We don't cover that kind of stuff. We just have the high level, here's the dialogue and here's the tags that we use to call that dialogue in the game. So for example, this opening section here was 4 or 5 pages of script, and now it's down to 1.5 pages of just dialogue. And what we have here is a character name. This is what we call a lock string. So this is our localization string. So we don't ever type these things in literally into live gameplay. We have them in a spreadsheet, and we actually only reference this tag. So this lock E1 S2 LE, that is a unique identifier for this line of dialogue. And what that means is that we can call this tag, and that will take us to this line, but in any language that we support. So we can put in, we can have that go into French, for example, and have a spreadsheet that has all these different versions of that one line. And so we basically take that script, break it down into a shooting script, then take that to the recording sessions and so on, and that gets used throughout development. So this was what we called a live document. It was being edited and reworked every day for nearly 2 years. I think it ended up 280 pages long, which is significantly longer than the script version because there's so much in there. As you can see, it's just page and page and page after page of dialogue. And what this also includes is all the potential variants of lines that you might get. So, for example, you might say that you do something and Emma says, okay, can you try that again for me? If you don't do that right away, if you spend 3 minutes not doing it, that there'll be another line that comes in which says, Sam, I need you to do that for me. That we call them a prompt line, where she'll ask you to do something again and repeat herself, but with a different bit of dialogue, so it's not just the same line every time. You can't really write that in a traditional script format. You can't write ifs and buts in a traditional script. It becomes very hard to read, so we would instead do that in these kind of formats. And then what we do from there, or as part of this process, is use what we call a beat sheet. And I've kind of shown this document at a few different events before. And this is where the majority of my story work actually happens, as dull as it might seem, but most of the work happens in a spreadsheet. And what we do here is break down the episode. The game used to be episodic until we kind of put it into one final game. Sorry, I've got a plane above me. So yeah, the game was episodic and split into chapters, and those chapters were then split further into scenes. And what I would do on this kind of what we call a beat sheet is write out every kind of story beat, every narrative or gameplay beat throughout the game into a timeline. And if I can zoom out, you can see that this is just first episode. So this is the first 20 minutes of the game.
Wow.
In sequence, and we've got multiple tabs for each section, big red bits or things we cut, for example. And if I zoom back in, what I'm doing here is for each scene I'm putting in a narrative description, so this just describes the action of the scene, what Ellie is thinking or what Emma is thinking while this is happening, which helps me work out what she should be saying and what the dialogue should be doing. In other versions of this document, I had what the player would be thinking and what we think the player should be focused on. So if we've set up some mysteries about where one of the crew members are, from that point on, we'll kind of have a note that this is one of the active investigations a player's doing subconsciously, like not as an objective in the game, not as a bit of text on the screen, but by this point, the player should be wondering where Josh is or who Josh is. So let's bear that in mind in all of these scenes from this point on until we resolve that mystery. That way, when it comes to writing a script, you're not just writing on a blank canvas and going, okay, where do I go next? You've kind of got this framework where you say, okay, by this point, a mysterious communication seizes Sam's systems and asks him to bring her. And this is a scene that happens maybe 10 minutes in. What Emma's thinking is, what is that interference? Why are these speakers speaking out? Whereas the player is thinking, what does bring her mean? Because the player and Emma now have a knowledge of different things. Emma doesn't see what you see, and she thinks that what's happened is a system malfunction. You're seeing something that's very different. So we now have two different paths. So when it comes to writing dialogue, I can now look at that scene and go, well, this is what Emma would believe, and this is what Sam would believe, and it makes it much easier for me to work out exactly what they would say. So it's kind of like problem solving a little bit, and everyone writes differently. Some people do just write blank canvas, but I just can't do it. I need to build myself a framework, not necessarily like character sheets or anything like that, but just within a story. If I know I need to get the player from A to B, if I can work out the route they're going to take physically, then I already have a series of rooms they might go into, things they might see, objects that might be important. If I can work out why that character wants to get from A to B, then I can start to think about the questions she might ask or the solutions she might have without actually writing any dialogue. I don't have to just start writing words. I can just almost let the story make itself by defining the structure in a different way. And on top of that, we have this gameplay description row. And this just literally says, what is the player going to be physically doing during these sections? So, for example, we have voice authentication as Sam authenticates Emma for the first time. Then we have a cutscene, and we have a response mode tutorial where Sam can respond to direct questions. So we're just really defining in this spreadsheet what is the player doing from one scene to the next. And much like the other rows, that gives us this kind of information to work within, but also allows us to take this kind of bird's eye view of the entire game or entire sequences of the game and say, how often are we using that game mechanic? Or we've got this voice authentication and we're only doing it once. Is it worth having it if we only do it once, or should we be using it more often? It really gives you this kind of bird's eye view. And we do this again a little bit lower down. This is a game mechanics sheet, which ties into, this is a little bit outdated, this one, but it ties into that same gameplay role, is that from a distance, each of these rows represents a different part of a different gameplay mechanic. And at a glance, I can see how often and what the relationship is between those mechanics. I can see that here we've got station-wide diagnostics, and we're also using that with camera interaction. But then we don't use camera interaction for another half hour, and that may be a problem, that may be a pacing issue. And so by looking at things just as blocks on the grid, you can start to look at your pacing before you've built anything. Before you've actually engineered part of the game or put dialogue in, you can kind of say, well, actually, we do a bunch of camera stuff, and then we don't do camera stuff for what looks like another hour, and that's not going to feel right. That's going to feel really weird, or you're going to feel like you're not in control for too long. So we can start to look at the order in which scenes happen. So it's quite a functional way of writing story and writing and pacing your gameplay is by looking at it in this way. And it's something I know a few designers and narrative designers that do this, and I know lots who don't. And it's not for everyone. It definitely, your mileage may vary depending on how you like to imagine things. But I don't think it's a bad exercise for people to do when constructing something from scratch.
Yeah, what's really impressive to me in all this that you've shown is that all of this work and all of these breakdowns go into making just a few seconds or a few lines of text that, on the other hand, need to explain so much to players regarding who they are, what is expected from them to do, what is their role in this whole game, and what the game is going to be about, right? So it really, I think, showcases how much work goes into game design and into having a clear vision for the game and what you want it to be and how to present this vision to the player.
Yeah, exactly. And I think actually, in a similar way, that one of the reasons why I kind of pursued this method was that I could communicate this to the other developers as well.
Right.
That a lot of these ideas are just in my head, and we've got a team of 14 people now, and I can't let them just guess what it is they have to do or just like make assumptions, because that's how you end up with a very inconsistent delivery. We want input from everyone, but we can't just have 14 people write a story individually, because you'll just end up with chaos. So this kind of helps let other people on the team know, as well as the players, like how this is going to be built, how this is going to feel, what I'm trying to achieve narratively, and what we're trying to achieve as a team for gameplay. In a way that anyone can, even someone who's not a developer, can look at that chart and understand the story and understand the pacing of that story without having to be a writer or an actor. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we have some questions regarding this block that have arrived. The first one was, what was your inspiration to make this game?
I read an article years ago when I was working on Alien Isolation. I read an article that was about the original Alien film and viewing that from the perspective of the alien. And I was just fascinated by it, because I'd worked on that game for nearly 5 years and had been, had watched the film 1,000 times while we were working, and then been given this article that made me think about the story in a completely different way. And it was the idea that this alien had, if you're familiar with the plot of Alien 1, in 1979 movie, the alien is born on a ship and it gets chased by humans, and they try and flush it out of an airlock, and all it wants to do is eat. And it was a really interesting way of looking at something which, as we depict it, is a horrible alien that gets born on the station and tries to hunt all the humans. But you can look at that story and flip it a little bit. And so I started thinking about other films and things that I loved that, you could change the perspective on and tell a completely unique story that you just never did before. And also one you could probably only do in a game because you played the role, right? And so 2001 was one of my favourite films from a visual point of view, and I started thinking about Hal and what it would be like to have to make the choices Hal makes in that film. And he does some pretty questionable things, but he has reasons for doing it. And we don't sympathise with it, but if we were as Hal, we'd maybe understand why he did those things and what his mission were and stuff like that. So Hal was seeing and hearing things that we couldn't comprehend. And made decisions as a result, and so that's the kind of thing I felt was really important. And the other aspect of it was about the idea of the player providing that consciousness to something that shouldn't have consciousness. Felt like a fourth wall breaking relationship between you and the character that again could only be done as a game. And a lot of that came from, there's been a lot of videos get shared up of people who are either someone who's maybe deaf or colorblind, and they get given hearing aids or glasses for the first time, and they see colour or they hear sound for the very first time, and it's like overwhelmingly emotional. And it's for people to watch it, let alone for them to experience. And it started making me think that if a computer was to become self-aware and have sympathy and empathy and trust issues and stuff, that would be incredibly overwhelming. That it's not just suddenly they would know how to wield those tools. It would be a totally alien experience for them. And so it just felt like there was a lot in there about letting the player take that role.
Right. That is really fascinating to see it from that perspective. Another question is pretty simple. Where can we find the game to try and play it?
Yeah, the game is out now. It's out on PC, on Steam and Epic. It's out on PS4, and as of tomorrow, it's on Xbox as well, and Xbox Game Pass as well. So yeah, it's pretty much any console or PC. No Switch version yet, unfortunately, but everything else.
Great. So another question that we had, in your opinion, is it more complicated to create a scenario for the video game or for the film?
I think it's definitely harder or more complicated to create a game story and scenario. The main reason is that the player can break it in ways that you can't as a film. With a film, we know we control exactly where the viewer looks. We show them exactly what we want them to see, when we want them to see it. You know, editing, cinematography, they all work in it's a language and tool set that we use to really control the experience. With games, however, the player can just like look away whenever they want.
Right.
They can miss vital moments, or they can, you know, we tell the player, okay, you need to go to the engine room, and they decide they don't want to go to the engine room, they want to go somewhere else, and it kind of breaks your pacing and it breaks the experience a little bit. And we have to design ways to compensate for that so that they don't just have a bad experience, but that we kind of like guide them back towards what we want them to do, whilst letting them explore and letting them have fun at the same time. So it's not so much the story that it's harder to write a game story in a narrative sense. It's just that you have to count for a lot more things going wrong, and that you can't trust that the story will be experienced exactly the way you want it. So you have to write all these like variants and extra lines, or if the player takes too long to do something, we have to have like another 5 lines of dialogue that help you get there, and that's where it becomes really tricky.
Right, especially since the game is such an interactive experience, you can't really railroad or keep the player's attention to where you want as much as you can in film with what you mentioned, all the camera work, cinematography and everything. Like here, you have given such control to players that they can choose to do whatever in that specific moment, and that really reflects on the narrative as well and on all the things that you want to show.
Yeah, exactly.
So on the topic of narrative, actually, our next question is pretty similar to that as well. For how long have you been working on the narrative of the game? Amazing concept. I think you touched a little bit on this when you showed us your Excel file as well.
Yeah, yeah. Like the ideas were coming about. I had ideas to make a UI-driven game since I started working in games, where I thought, you know, this is my area of expertise. I would love to make a game that focused on that. But from the narrative point of view, like say it was maybe 2015 or something like that, where, yeah, I'm forgetting which year it is now, something like that, where I'd read that article and had the idea. I basically had a few months off between working at Creative Assembly before I started at Rockstar Games, and thought, if I was to make my own studio and make my own game, what would it be? And that's when the ideas started coming and started to kind of flesh out the first prototype. But from then, we pitched the game in January 2016, and it came out last year. So it's been 3 or 4 years to make the full thing in total. Yeah.
Right. Another question and an opinion is, game is really amazing. Did you ever consider a VR option?
We did, yeah. We built some of the VR option. During our prototype phase, when we were pitching, we were asked to pitch a VR version, and we did spend maybe 3 months building a VR version of the prototype. And I think what we built was really interesting. It was very difficult because the main reason why we didn't ship VR in the end was that we couldn't just put the player in VR and still use the idea that the player was viewing the world through cameras that were positioned around the room.
Oh.
And the reason that didn't work is because the player with their VR headset can move their heads around and they can look around like a human. And so instead of feeling like a camera, different CCTV cameras around the modules in the space station, it felt like you were just teleporting a human into different places. And the kind of final death knell was when a producer put the headset on, saw the environment for the first time and said, "Oh wow, this looks really cool. So you get to play as Emma then." And I was like, no. And we realised that you just couldn't get that feeling across, and all that work we were trying to achieve with making you be Sam and almost role play Sam without realising it was completely undone by VR. Suffice to say, we did actually make what I think was a fairly decent little prototype that was fun to play. We took that feedback, we made something that was a lot more abstract so that you didn't feel like a human in the space. We rendered that as a kind of a wall of camera feeds all around you and put you in this kind of virtual space. And it kind of worked. It was quite fun, quite interesting, but it was so different from the flat version of the game, the screen version of the game, that there was no way our budget would allow us to make both. That it was essentially two different games, and that just wasn't going to happen. So I still believe that the VR game could have been interesting, but it's not as interesting as what people might think it would be, because we did explore it quite heavily. And we were like, oh, that would be really cool, but once you really start making it and start digging into what that means, you start to realise that actually a lot of the ideas don't work when you've got full head movement and using your hands to grab things and stuff like that. They're very human actions, and we're trying to make you not human. We're trying to say that you are the station rather than being on the station, and VR doesn't help. VR makes you feel very much like you're in a space, not that you are the space, if that makes sense. So, it just doesn't work as well as what I think people would hope.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, and I must say unexpected. When I saw the question, I was like, all right, this would make an amazing VR game. Everything is poised to make it one, but you're completely right. Like, that's a really good hunch, and not only hunch, but knowing what makes your game and what doesn't, and then what can work for it. So that's really important.
The thing is, I think a lot of people like the idea of a VR game because of the environments, and they want to be in those environments, and that's totally valid. That we talked about doing this at one point, actually making like a little separate standalone experience where you could be one of the astronauts and move around that space, but it's not the same game and not the same story whatsoever.
Yeah. And our final question is, you had a lot of roles during game making. Can you tell us how such all-in-one role comes into shape in a game studio?
That's I think that's a big part of how we got to where we are. Was that I'd started off in games. I worked as a graphic designer before I got into games, and then that kind of led me into UI design. I wanted to work in games my whole life, but there was no route to do that in Glasgow. There was no courses, there was no university degrees or anything like that, so I just had to not do it and find other things that were interesting. But eventually I worked into that, and I started off doing graphic design, but I also done trailers for the games. And then on my first game, helped on some of the story aspects to do with tutorials that also tied into UI and stuff like that. So I kind of got my hands into a lot of different areas, and then when I started working on Alien, I began as a 2D artist, predominantly working on the UI, but also doing again kind of graphic design, motion graphics, and 2D animation, that kind of thing. But again, quickly started to get involved in the writing process, in cutscenes. I attended motion capture sessions, and part of that was, I managed to get the trust of my leads by doing a good job and being as helpful as I could. But also because I really pushed to get involved, because I wanted to see the bigger picture. I wanted to know how this was coming together. Like, Alien was the biggest game in my career. It still is the biggest game in my career, but it was to have that level of involvement with something so widely known. I wanted to know what it was like to be on the set at the motion capture suite and say, and watch the director work and watch the actors work, and it was me pushing to do that, and probably annoying some people on the way by just standing around and asking how they've done stuff. But it was that kind of pushing myself to get involved that allowed me to do what I do now, because that's my job now, is to be involved in everyone's work a little bit. direct them a little bit. But even things like attending the motion capture stuff, that's how I met Keziah, who is Emma in the game. She worked on Alien as well. We met through that. You know, it's all just kind of come together in the end. But having lots of different roles is a risky proposition. You know, the old phrase that you're a jack of all trades, master of none. That does mean that if you're a master of none, you'll find it very hard to keep moving in your career path, because you'll never be particularly great at any one thing. You'll be good at a lot of different things, but a lot of studios don't need that. They need experts. And I could see that on the horizon a little bit for me. Like, I was good at UI, but I didn't want to spend my whole life doing UI design. I wanted to do more stuff, but I could see that I was not going to become an art director or a game director in someone else's studio, and that kind of led me to start my own, take risks.
That's a, you know, one thing that is also, I think, like a cost-benefit things for many people in game development, like how much you know about jobs that are not your own. What do you need to do to become a game director? What do you need to do to become a lead? What do you need to do to have your own studio in the end? And I think that the answer is really different for each of those positions, right? So if you're like the guy on which a whole studio relies, when you start your own studio, you have to know a lot of different aspects of game making, like, because you won't have another person, right, to just say do this and then let him rely completely on him. Yeah. Right? You need to be somewhat involved, especially in such smaller teams and in such experimental games, as much as you can, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my time over the last few years has been spent learning from the people that we've hired. You know, we hire the best people we can,
right,
to not to do something that we already know, like to do stuff we don't know how to do. Like, I'm trying to find a VFX artist that can do stuff that I don't understand, so that I can learn from them. But I still need to understand how their job works. Otherwise, I can't help them make good stuff. I can't put them to use properly if I don't know what they're good at and I don't know how to do things. So I've kind of ended up in a position where I still actively do a lot of game dev work. Like, I'm in the engine and I build a lot of stuff, but nowadays it's usually lighting and VFX and polish that I'm adding to stuff, and some of the UI stuff as well. But I still need to know how the design stuff, how the actual game design is authored. You know, I'm involved in what it is, but also how they implement it. I still need to understand that, whether I ever do it or not. Otherwise, I can't make a decision based on that. You know, I can't go, well, let's do this or let's do that, if I don't know how to build the game.
Yeah, well, basically, since you're division holder, for example, for observation, you can't tell if something that has not yet been made is consistent with that vision or not, if you don't know the way that it's going to be made, how much time it takes, how much effort it takes, what problems may rise up. I think that's like the gist of it. It's not that you have to be able to do everyone's job, but as you said, you need to be able to understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we have one more question for this section, although this is a bit more general. So the question goes, I am aware that you're on the creative side of the studio, but I wonder what are your predictions for the industry in the post-COVID period? I am particularly interested from the indie side of the spectrum.
Okay. Yeah, it's well, yeah, it's wild. This it's hard to predict anything at the moment.
Yeah.
We like I say, we're quite a small team. We're like 14 people. We transitioned to work from home really quickly before we were told to by our government. We decided that we could see it coming and we wanted to do that transition on our own terms. So we do it, be prepared rather than kind of react. And so far things have been, fairly business as usual. Like the games industry is very, very lucky that the majority of stuff can be done from home.
Yeah.
We can go on Slack, we can go on Teams or Skype, and we can communicate and continue to work without too much interference. We had some IT issues, we had some problems with developer kits and using them from home addresses and stuff like that. We had some IT nonsense and some administration nonsense, but generally we can do our job. I don't like it personally. Like, I don't like working from home or living at work, as we now call it. It's not for everyone. Like, I think there's a there's definitely a drive of people who think it's great that we can work from home and we don't have to commute and we don't have to, you know, for some people who are more introverted, don't have to worry about going into the studio. But I think we also lose a lot. And the lead designer in our games is my brother, Graham, and obviously I've known him my whole life and we're best mates and we talk every day. And since we've been locked down and we've lived apart and we've not been able to talk every day, we've found that our creative drive has been a lot slower and a lot harder to get into the right mindset because conversations over Skype have a delay in them. They're not natural. They're not like the way you talk to each other when you're in a room. And we found that to be really difficult, whereas other members of our team are just like, hey, this is great. I just get my task lists. We have a catch up in the morning. I go make some art and then hand it in at the end of the day and everyone's happy. But for some aspects of it, it's very difficult. Yeah. So as far as I think how it affects the industry, you know, the indie side of the industry at a wider scale, like I say, at the moment, games are probably enjoying a bit more attention because people are locked at home, and they are a great way of you know, especially online games where you can, you know, chat with people and hang out and do stuff together. That we've probably enjoyed, you know, a bit of benefit from this whole situation. But if it continues for a long time, and you know, we have a second wave or a third wave, or if this wave never goes away, which as it currently kind of is, you know, if the economy starts to fail in different territories worldwide, then people aren't going to buy games anymore. You know, they're not going to have the money to buy games anymore, and it's going to start to affect us in a different way. And so, you know, I'm very much in favour of, you know, keeping people safe and locking down. I do understand the economic crisis that's on the horizon, but we've been kind of immune to it. You know, the games industry's been kind of immune to it, but that won't last forever if the world at large doesn't kind of get a hold of things. So.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely hard. And I was talking to Emma Fisher's voice actress yesterday, and she's having to do a motion capture shoot this week, socially distanced. So the actors are having to act out a scene but stay 2 meters apart. And I don't know how she's going to do it, and she doesn't know how she's going to do it. And so there's definitely aspects of the industry like that don't work at the moment and that are very difficult. So things like story-based games might just be a lot harder to produce. You know, cutscene-driven games be harder to produce over the next year. So yeah, but it's anyone's guess, to be honest.
Right. Okay, thank you for the insight as well. Okay, so since I don't see that we have any more questions about this part, maybe we can start with the second scene that you wanted to talk about, and fish out some of the details over there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just going to skip ahead on this video to a section. It's just literally about 5 minutes later, and it's a slightly more involved section of gameplay. So I'll play it through and then I'll kind of talk about some of the aspects of it. The prompt of the video.
What errors are you showing? Sam, run your self-diagnostic procedure. What errors are you showing?
Relocation functions are offline. I require auto-routing to access module cameras.
Okay, I can manually relocate you, but once I get out of here, I'll get your systems up and running.
So I'll just stop it there. There's kind of 3 sections to this bit of gameplay. Now, the puzzles, you know, we call them puzzles, but there's just part of our main gameplay. You know, it's a kind of weird point-and-click adventure that you're doing for certain parts of the game. And our puzzles are not traditional puzzles that you would get in games like, I don't know, The Witness or Resident Evil or something like that, where you have to, you know, work out a pattern or you have to put the right gem into the right slot to make a statue move or something like that, right? We don't do those kind of gameplay puzzles. Our puzzles are usually just asking you to do something that the character would have to do and making you actually go through the motions of doing it, however mundane they might seem. But the point is always that each of these bits of gameplay are always, you know, furthering the story or furthering the character in some way, so that they're not just meaningless. They're not just, you know, put a gem in a statue. in order to open the next door. You're still going to learn something by doing it, and that's what makes them very different from traditional puzzles. Now, the interactivity is not actually complex whatsoever. They're usually really, really simple puzzles. But our no code's game design kind of ethic is that we don't want to make a puzzle hard and challenge you in that sense. What we want to do is make you wonder what the puzzle is in the first place. Like, that's the puzzle. The puzzle is, what am I being asked to do and how do I do it? The actual solution of how you do it is really simple, but it's about working out your role, what you're supposed to be doing, why you're doing it is the important part. So in this first example, this video was recorded by one of our QA who pretty much speedruns everything, so I'm going to apologise for the extremely fast motion there. But if I just wind back a little bit, when we first go
Progress are you showing?
all we see is this. We see Sam's self-diagnostics window drawn on the screen and a single button flashing. Now that's not a puzzle, right? That's not hard to know. Maybe I should click on that thing. So you click on the button run self-diagnostic, run Sam diagnostic, sorry. Some kind of flavor text and you know, a process happens, and you're then given 3 more options, and you can click on one of these options, and each of these has just a little different thing you do. And most of these things are just like pressing a button or moving a left stick in a certain way. And the only bit that's kind of problematic or a little bit difficult is that once you've done those things, you need to tell Emma what you found out, because she doesn't see this, you know, she can't see what you see. So you run this network check, and you know, we don't ask the players to read every single line of text. A lot of it is like really small, and you know, it's all accurate, like it's all relevant, but it's not essential. So if you sit and read it all, it's great, and you'll learn more about it. But if not, you should get the gist of things. So when you run this network diagnostic, all these kind of modules, each of these red boxes represents a module on the space station. All of them are red. You can't access anything. But then you're given this little prompt where it says module relocation is non-operational, crew assist required. And you have to say that to Emma. So that's the output. So she's asked you to check the network diagnostics. You've ran a test, as basic as it is, and you're going to tell her what the answer is. And when you do tell her the answer, you're also telling yourself part of the story, because you're now confirming that the relocation functions are offline. Sam can't do everything he's supposed to do. So as a player, you don't have all the options. You've lost access to your signal, to your functions. You can't move around the ship, and that you need the crew to help you. And what that's trying to do is establish, again, who you are, but what your relationship with Emma is, that you're going to have to work together to do this. This is not a case of her saying, okay, Sam, perform some magic for me and you just make things happen. That actually you're going to need her help as much as she needs yours. And so even though these are kind of like little throwaway lines, they're still embellishing that relationship and still giving you an idea of what we're going to play. So when we go to the second one, the memory core, we have another very simple puzzle. We show these 4 memory cores with 1, 2, 3, 4 under it, and all the player has to do is move their cursor over one of these numbers, press X, and then push the left stick. And it's same as the diagnostic earlier. We're just having you be the one that actually sweeps the memory. So we call it a core memory sweep, where we're going to have you like search the memory. When we talk about things like that, we want the player to be the one searching it. But it doesn't have to be a complicated action. It doesn't have to be an in-depth, like, you know, loads of text on the screen or anything like that. It's just the motion of doing it. Let the player feel like they've actively done something. So in this kind of example, we make them push up on the left stick, and it sweeps the memory and shows them what we found. And underneath each one, it tells us what the degradation of memory is. And so again, all these little bits of flavor text are sort of telling you something important. There's very little green left, with green being good and red being bad. We can tell Emma that the main memory cores are all degraded, and that he says I've lost significant station data. So again, by solving that little puzzle, we've also said Sam can't remember anything. Sam can't remember what anything is. He can't remember how any of the systems work. So we're just like reinforcing over and over the notion of who you are and why you're doing the things you're doing, and it's kind of almost justifying why the player's now involved. You know, why are you like the one that's doing it? Why are you making the decision to search these things? It's just to let you know that the reason why you have to search the whole ship and reconnect to all systems is because everything has been degraded and everything has been corrupted because of something. And the final piece of that puzzle is kind of, we're telling you all that about Sam, we're telling you that about the game design, about why you have to do the things, but we're also planting a seed for a mystery, which is, well, why has this happened? You know, why is your memory degraded? Why can't you relocate? There's got to be, in a game full of, you know, jargon and technical descriptions of things, there's got to be a scientific reason why these things have happened, and that's what you're going to try and find out. So we're constantly reinforcing that theme of who you are and what you're doing in almost every line of dialogue for the first half hour. And then the last one there is the crew tracker error. Again, a very simple puzzle where you're presented with, you know, 4 things, and all you have to do is click and hold on each one to attempt a connection, and each one gives you an output. Again, this is not so much a puzzle. The only thing puzzling about it is that we don't tell you have to do that. And that's the other key factor to the way that we design our gameplay is, like you said, we want you to work out what the puzzle is rather than struggle to solve it. So we don't give you a prompt at the bottom, and this can infuriate some players where they're very much used to being spoon-fed, you know, the press X to open the door, press square to do this. We are very reluctant to do that because we want to keep the player in character, and Sam doesn't know how to do this stuff. He can't remember any of this, so, and neither does the player. So it keeps you and the player in lockstep together, like Sam and the player know the same things. If the player doesn't know how a system works, then Sam shouldn't know how the system works, and we can keep you and Sam narratively in check with each other. And so that's why we tend not to put prompts on the screen. We don't have like press X to test the sensor array. We just leave it up to you. So you can move the cursor around and stumble across a hitbox and press a button to make something happen. You kind of feel your way through the puzzles by trial and error. And that's exactly how Sam would be behaving, because he's been asked to do something that he doesn't quite understand himself. So it's really all about tying that together. So we use that concept throughout the entire game. Like say, some people get frustrated with it because it doesn't give them the information they need, but that is the game, you know, and maybe it's not for them sometimes. Sometimes it is our fault where maybe we've been a little bit too cryptic and maybe need a little bit of help. And we did add a lot of stuff where Emma might actually speak up and say, oh, I think I've seen another member of the crew use this before. I think you have to do X, Y, Z, and kind of like in a story way tell you what you need to know and give you some hints without kind of, you know, flashing it up on the screen. But it is that idea that your gameplay is uniquely linked to that part of the story. And the kind of last piece of that puzzle is this kind of feeling your way around the screen. We use this kind of analogy for a lot of our, for our staff to explain how we were making stuff and why we were doing things this way. And I don't know if people can remember, well, people probably can't remember themselves, but they're familiar with when babies have walkers or little seats that they can sit in, and there's little, dials they can move and squeezy things they can squeeze, and a little abacus they can swing right, and it's a little physical play set. And that's what our game design is kind of like, is we want the player to just experiment with the stuff in front of them and learn what it does. Except instead of learning with a squeezy toy and an abacus, you're using a nuclear reactor on a space station. But it's the same concept. It's still, and that's a deliberate, analogy or a metaphor, because Sam has been reborn and he's like a baby again, and he's learning how to use the systems, and that's how people learn, right? Is that you try and you fail and you try again. And so the game design is kind of really method that way, where we're making you explore these puzzles the way that an infant would, or the way that something that's curious would. And so and by the end of that, the sequence, which only lasts a couple of minutes, by the time you've done this and told Emma everything she needs to know, you can now move on to the next part of the story. But by playing a little bit of game, you've actually learned more of the story. You've learned more about Emma. You've learned more about yourself, and usually on every beat through this opening kind of episode or opening section, we're planting another mystery as well. So we're getting you to think about all these, like, okay, well, what does that mean? And, okay, my memory's degraded. Okay, that's why I've got to collect bits of data around the station, but why was it degraded in the first place, and what is the relevance of this data, and so on and so forth. And what that takes you on to here is the first time you're given access to the cameras. And so one of the main ways you get around the station and you play the game is by jumping between fixed cameras throughout every module of the game. With each one you can look around, you can pan, you can zoom, and then you can then transition to other cameras in the room. And that way you can look at parts of the room you can't see from one angle, and that's just a general part of the puzzle of, like, you need to get a door open for Emma. First you've got to find the room, then you've got to find which door it is, work out which door it is she's trying to get into, and bear in mind this is a 0G environment where there's no such thing as up, so a door can be anywhere, depending on the layout of the station. So you're then going to find it, then you have to link to it, and then you have to process a command. You know, we're making you step through the sections, and part of that was kind of inspired by when I attempted to go to university when I was a lot younger, and I wanted to learn game making basically, but the only course I could find was programming, and I was not a programmer and I'm not a mathematician, and I really struggled with it. But they told me about how to break down tasks for, like, how to understand programming, and the example they gave me was like if you make toast with a toaster. And they said, like, if you ask someone, oh, how do you make toast, they would say they take some bread, they put it in a toaster, and then they wait and take it out. But a programmer has to break that down into steps. Like, you have to take the bread out of the bread basket, and you have to put that in the toaster, and you have to make sure the toaster's plugged in, and then you have to set that right. There's all these steps in the way that we just take for granted because we know them, but Sam here doesn't know those steps, and so the player has to go through that every time. And that's what makes it believable, and that's what makes it feel like a technical process, is that we're not just saying, hey Sam, can you open the door? Or Emma will say that, she'll say, Sam, open the door to module 6. And she expects you to know how to do that, but as a player and as Sam with no memory, you're going, well, shit, how do I open the door to module 6? Like, you've got to find out, well, how do I even get to module 6? And then which door is it, and how do I link in? And you have to run through that section. And it just means that, again, you're always in lockstep with the character, you're always kind of sympathizing with Sam and understanding where he is, and as I keep saying, you role play the character without realizing. You know, we're not asking it to pretend to be a robot, but what we make you do kind of makes you do that in the first place. So, so that's the basic kind of premise of how we design our game logic.
Yeah, it seems to me that the reason why you were so successful in immersing the player in the role of Sam is because you basically made him unlearn all of the human protocols, like opening the door, and learn the language that Sam uses, the language that, you know, he can actually deconstruct in itself. And once you get to this point where you start thinking like Sam and start thinking about all these different steps, that's when you really feel like you're not playing a game where there is a computer that you control, but you're the computer that controls the space station.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So,
it's funny because it's come up a few times in things like Steam forums and walkthroughs where I've seen people post, you know, oh, I'm stuck at this part of the game. Emma's asked me to do this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and people will just reply, "What would Sam do?" Like, think about it as what would an AI do? Like, you know, I've got to open this door, but I don't understand how I'm supposed to get it open. And you say, well, what would a program do? It would need to follow those steps, and then you go, okay, yeah. And like you say, once they start to learn how to think like Sam, the game actually gets a lot easier and a lot more intuitive, even though it's quite, you know, unintuitive deliberately. Once you get into the right mindset, you know, when she does ask you to open a door later on, you don't think twice about it, and you just know the right way of doing it. But it's very, like you say, it's very different from the human version of that, which is just, you know, use your body. You don't have to think about how your arms get there. You know, you don't have to think about how your hand gets to the handle. You just do. But a computer would have to consider all of that. So, yeah, that's definitely the kind of.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions regarding this part as well. One of them is, have you read any books that helped during the design process?
Yes, we have a big library full of stuff. We have a lot of reference materials that we got about the ISS and the Apollo programs, and we pretty much hoovered up anything we could find that was a technical document of any sort on NASA and ESA's space programs. Some of that was used from an art point of view, so that we could recreate the interiors of the ISS and these kind of things without being exactly the same, but make it feel like this could be a believable space station just a few years from now. But the other part of it was for designers and for Graham especially to kind of deconstruct some of the problems that would actually happen and could actually happen, and then work out, okay, what would the astronauts' role be and what would Sam's role be if that was to happen. So we learned a lot about like fire protocols on the ISS and what happens if there's a fire, because a fire in a pressurized space station is one of the worst things that can happen. And so we learned about how we cope with that and what automatic systems kick in and what the astronauts have to do. And then we worked out, okay, the automatic systems are not automatic, that's Sam. So that's the player, has to do those bits. And it kind of helped us work out some of the parts of the game, what does Bear do in any given situation, because we had this real life documentation. We had things like the Saturn V flight manual, which detailed every single part of that rocket and the cockpit and stuff like that. And we can only get our heads around so much of it. We're not astrophysicists, but it helped us ground everything in a realistic setting. We could say, well, is that a problem that you would have? And we'd look through all this reference material to find out, okay, how do airlocks work and what happens, what happens if an airlock becomes depressurized too quickly? And it's not just like the human side of it, of like, well, a human will get sucked out and turned to ice or whatever, we depict in Hollywood. But we'd find out what the structural problem would be and how that would affect the space station, so on and so forth. And so it was a fascinating, we learned so much over the kind of 2 or 3 years that we've done that kind of thing. But as far as actual books goes, it was mainly like technical manuals and books about the ISS and Apollo program that really got us in there. Creatively, we referenced a lot of movies, and we watched a lot of Event Horizon and the Apollo movie, Interstellar, stuff like that, to get a sense of how we depict that science. Like how we get that across on screen. Not so much about what the story is, but just like how do we communicate technical problems in a way that the audience can understand without having to be an astrophysicist. It's quite a challenge, making something seem intelligent but also accessible. Was quite hard, and so a lot of that came from movies and how to kind of tell a story at a distance the way we are. So there's quite a lot of things we reference.
Yeah, and it really shows all the research that you did. From what I read, observation was really lauded as being very true to life when it comes to the looks and the feels of the International Space Station, and all that work that you put in really shows off. So kudos. Yeah.
It was great. Like, one of the best moments for us, for the team, was that shortly after we launched the game, there was an article about observation in New Scientist magazine, and that was just huge for us because they were talking about the science in the game rather than the game itself, and we thought, we made it.
Yeah.
But to even kind of catch the eye of actual physicists and astronomers and stuff was really cool. That we kind of knew we'd done a decent job of trying to keep things realistic.
Yeah, really, really amazing stuff. We have one more question. The question is, what would you recommend to someone entering the indie video games industry?
Well, the indie industry is, it's tough. It's very difficult. It's very easy to get into. It's very easy, like anyone can start. Anyone can download Unity or Unreal and do tutorials or use their existing knowledge to make a game or band together with other people. But actual success is extremely, extremely rare. We're very, very fortunate and lucky to partner with publishers that saw what we were trying to do and all that kind of stuff. But the big thing that made that happen was that I'd been in the business for 10, 12 years already with a lot of big titles under my belt, so they could trust that I at least had the experience to back up what I was claiming. Approaching publishers without any prior experience and just a prototype is always going to be extremely difficult. It's not to say it doesn't happen. If something looks great, the publisher will take a risk on it and will maybe help get a team, work out how to create a team with you, or assign a producer and stuff like that, but it does make it a lot harder. I think the best bit of advice I give to people who want to do indie stuff, especially, is to do game jams, which are happening all year round. And the global game jam that happens in January, as well as the Ludum Dare that happens every 3 months, I think. And these are great ways to experiment, try stuff out, and actually get that content out there for other people to try. Get that game up on itch.io and let people try it, get their feedback. Like focus on that side of things first. If you've not made any games already, your first game is not going to be great. You do have to try and fail, and you might have great ideas in it, but it's probably not going to be a great game. So, cut your teeth on prototypes first. Learn the mistakes in game jams, so that when you do pitch something, you've already learned the hard way how to do some things, and that you can have a much more solid kind of approach. But it really depends. I mean, like, we're an indie company, but there's 14 of us. We're in a studio. It doesn't feel that much different from working in one of the big companies. It's just the amount of people that are there. Like, we're still a very professional team in terms of how we operate, and we're an experienced team in that sense. But indie can mean so many things. Like, we're an indie team, but also a guy that I know is a single-man dev who does everything himself and puts out some really fantastic looking stuff. It just takes 10 times as long to do it because he's on his own. But he's an indie as well, so the term doesn't really work too well these days, I don't think. It kind of just means anyone without being owned by another studio. But our experience now is even wildly different from what it was when we started 5 years ago, our kind of day-to-day life and how hard it is to get going. So I would say the best thing is just to get involved in game jams, find people that you like working with, and try and build stuff together and see what comes out.
Yeah, great, thanks. The next question is, do you have any plans for bringing observation to the Xbox One or Nintendo Switch?
I do. So there's no plans for Switch, unfortunately. A couple of reasons, but one is performance, and I'm trying to make the game run on the Switch. But the second was just the complexity of the UI and how bespoke it is. How animated and tightly controlled it is. Condensing that down onto a small screen just really didn't work. We did try it, and we'd have to redesign the entire UI essentially to work on the Switch, and that's just too big a task for us. We'll never say never. We might do something in the future with another team who might take on that, but it won't be something we do ourselves. However, for the Xbox One, it is coming out tomorrow, which is really good. Yeah. And coming out on Game Pass. So if you've got Game Pass, it'll be free. And yeah, we're really glad to finally bring it to Xbox as well.
Great. And the final question, what was the most challenging part of delivering game from pitching to finalization?
Ooh, probably finalization. Pitching was hard, but pitching is always difficult. But yeah, I was really confident in what the idea was. It just took a while to work out how to tell it to people, like how to sell the idea. Essentially, I hate using that phrase of selling the idea, but just to get their buy-in, to get them to understand what it was I was trying to do without having built anything yet is extremely hard. Trying to communicate what's in your brain and saying, "Trust me, it's going to be great," is not enough when a lot of money's at stake. So that was tricky, but I had confidence. But actually finishing the game, it was two years of full development, plus the time before that pitching and stuff like that. And it was just as it got to the last kind of 4 months where, you've got a lot of bugs and you're not doing any of the cool creative stuff anymore. You're just doing the really annoying, broken things. And it's very hard to keep your head above water at that point because every day is being hit with new problems, not new cool things. It's just, okay, we just made a new build and this level doesn't work, or this character is just now inverted and floating around weirdly, and you're just spending every day dealing with trying to put out fires, and that's exhausting. It is in any game, it's exhausting, but I think that was coupled with me starting to lose confidence because you're kind of like, oh my god, is this game broken, and is anyone even going to like it?
Yeah.
That the run-up to release was just really, really stressful. And it was such a relief when the game released and we got our reviews in and they were all great that it was like we all pretty much lay on the floor exhausted, kind of like finally we got there. But Yeah, it's just tough when when you get really into the thick of things and all you're being hit with is problems. You forget about all the good stuff you've done. You forget about how excited people might be when they reach certain parts of the game because you've seen them a million times. You're not excited by it anymore. Like I can't ever feel what it's like to see one of the twists or get one of the reveals. Like I'll always know what they are before they ever existed, so I'll never be surprised by it. And it's very easy to forget that other people are going to be surprised by that stuff, and they are going to be excited by it when you just can't relate anymore. So I've always said, like, for every game I've made, by the time it came to actually releasing it, I've said, I don't know what I've made. Like, I don't know what this is anymore, but have it. And I hope you like it. And I've always felt like that, and I think it's probably healthy to think that way in some way, where I'm not going, hey, this is amazing, or this is terrible. That you get far too close to it and you can't see it the way anyone else is going to see it anymore, and that's quite hard to cope with sometimes when the pressure's on. But yeah, it's just part of the business. I'm sure it's the same for film and TV as well.
Yeah, I always remember this interview with one of the guys who did like the whole game by himself, and it was immensely successful. And people asked him naturally, so what was going through your mind when you were developing this game and when you were making it? How did you feel? And he was like, I thought to myself every day, this game is so stupid. This game is so stupid. Nobody's going to like this game. Not because, I mean, like you said, inherently, and at the beginning, you're very excited about an idea, but the more nitpicky you get with all of the polish and all the technical details, the art details, you just can't see the game from the player's perspective anymore. So naturally, it feels too familiar, too banal or whatever, and then you just can't see it for the first time anymore, ever.
Yeah, that's it. And like I say, it's even worse than that, is that even the first time you saw it, you already knew.
Yeah.
You already knew what it was. Like, you were never surprised. And the moments that are really fun is when you've had something bubbling away for a while, and you finally get it in game, or you finally get a feature and you've been waiting a long time for, and you do get a bit of excitement, and you kind of like, I remember for observation, a big moment was some of the modules you go in have windows to the outside, but for the first year of the game you couldn't see anything outside. There was no planet, there was no art at all, so it just always felt like a black window. And then we finally got the kind of skybox, and never had Saturn rendering in the background, and it was just like a big moment for us. We were like, oh, it's beautiful. And it wasn't really because of what it was just that it was such a big change visually that we felt like we'd seen something for the first time, and it had a big effect on us. And moments like that are just gold. You really have to hang on to them, because the last 6 months of any project is just a nightmare of everything breaks and nothing works, and then you get some people to test the game and they do something you weren't expecting and it breaks things, and and none of that's fun. It's essential, but it's not fun. It's hard work. But like I say, that's not different for, I think, every single person that works in games has experienced that.
Right. So I would like to thank you, Jon, for this beautiful talk. All of your insights were very valuable. I think that anyone, whether they're already in the industry or thinking about jumping in, really found your talk informative. I personally learned a lot from this webinar, and I really think that this is like an invaluable experience for anyone that was here. So I would like to thank you for the talk, and I would like to thank all of our attendees, as well as all of the British Council partners, especially the Serbian Games Association, who works tirelessly with us to organize this very interactive seminars. If you want to listen to any other talks or any other webinars that we've had in the past and that we will have in the future, you can head to the British Council website. This session as well will be available pretty soon, and we hope that this content can inspire all of you on your career journey and motivate you to further explore your opportunities and all of the opportunities that the gaming industry has to offer you. Thank you all for being with us today. All the best to you, and see you soon.